Hello everyone and welcome back to Vancouver, Canada. It's game 2 of the 1971 semi-final match between Bent Larsen and Bobby Fischer. Now, as you've seen in game number 1, it was really a masterpiece played by both players. Unfortunately for Larsen, he missed that bishop to c5 idea, which was a brilliant follow-up on Fischer's rook captures on e5. And if you've checked out the article I told you to check out in my previous video, then you know that Bent Larsen said that he will defeat Bobby Fischer, that he will win the candidates, and that he will become world champion. Of course, he has to beat Spassky to do that. That he will, put so much pressure against Fischer in the early games that Fischer will simply crack under pressure. So things definitely are not going the way he planned. Fischer won game 1 brilliantly. Now Larsen has the white pieces, and it's very interesting. It's really an excellent game, one that can be easily overlooked when checking out all of the games of the match. And thank you everyone for sharing the information about Robert Hubner in the comments of my previous video. As we did mention, I didn't know why he resigned the match after only losing one game to Tigran Petrosian, but if you haven't read in the comments already, it seems that the audience in Seville, where the match was played, was extremely loud, and Hubner really couldn't take it. So he was in time trouble, and he couldn't face the noise from the audience. He blundered one move, and Petrosian won game number 7, but the noise wasn't all that much problem for Tigran Petrosian, because Petrosian had a hearing aid, and then he just turned it down, and the noise didn't bother Petrosian. So I mean, seems like not all that much to resign a whole match for, but you just lost with the white pieces against Petrosian. Next game, Tigran Petrosian will have the white pieces, and if Petrosian wishes it, I'm sure Petrosian can easily draw all the games. So I guess it's justified. But yeah, we'll check out into that a bit more. But that's everything you said in the comments. So about this game, let's check out this nice photo. We don't have a lot of them, but those we do, we're gonna check them out. So let's see what happened here. Larsen had the white pieces, and he opened with c4. So okay, the English opening he prepared. We have c5. Bobby replies with the symmetrical variation. Knight f3, g6, and d4. C captures on d4, knight captures, and now comes knight to c6. We have e4 here, and with this e4 move, Larsen transposes the game. The game transposes into the Sicilian defense, the accelerated dragon variation, which is a bit odd for Fischer to allow this. Well, not odd, but as you know, Fischer rarely played the dragon, well, never, and he said about the dragon and the Pirc defense that it's not a really good opening for black. White can simply push g4, h4, h5 and win the game. So it's very interesting that Fischer allows this. No doubt that he prepared something nice for Larsen. Knight to f6, knight to c3, and now d6. This is standard theory of the dragon. Bishop to e2, knight captures on d4, queen captures on d4, and now bishop to g7. And here bishop to g5 by Larsen. It seems like a dangerous move allowing this idea here, but you don't really have any good discoveries. For example, knight h5. You'll simply move the queen, and white will still achieve this nice queen-bishop battery where he can exchange the dark square bishop, and you will simply have a funny knight on h5. So okay, bishop to g5, we have h6, asking Larsen what he wants to do with the bishop, bishop to e3, and now castles. Larsen goes back, queen to d2 with a tempo against the h6 pawn, king to h7 defending, and now we have castles. And here bishop to e6. An interesting move by Fischer, which Larsen will immediately try to punish. f4. So okay, we have rook to c8 with a double attack against the c4 pawn. b3, and now comes queen to a5. A very nice move, pressures this knight on c3. If the knight ever moves, then the bishop will also be attacking it. And also, the queen is kind of keeping an eye on the f5 square, but not really, which you'll see in a moment. Here Larsen pushes a3, we have a6, and now comes f5. And Larsen's f5 idea is more than justified, because here if you play g captures, e captures, now you cannot play bishop captures, because the rook can simply capture the bishop. And you see now that the queen's defense of the f5 square is only imaginary, because if queen captures, bishop to d3 will win the queen. Knight can't block, because this knight is also guarding the d4 square, so here you would simply lose the queen and the game. So after this f5 move, Fischer goes bishop to d7, and now we have b4 attacking Fischer's queen. So now Fischer can either go queen to e5, which is a pretty dangerous thing to do, because queen will not have all that many squares to go to, or he can go back queen to c7, but then the queen will kind of be out of the game. So Fischer decides to go queen e5, you know, straight to the middle of the board. We have rook 8 to e1, offering the e4 pawn here, but Larsen's so-called sacrifice of the pawn is justified because you can't really capture it. If you play knight captures, simply knight captures. Queen captures, now comes rook to f4, forcing the queen to go all the way back to c6. Bishop to f3 now attacking the queen. Queen goes back, and now rook to h4 with a powerful attack against the black king, which would in the end prove to be decisive. So okay, rook 8 to e1, Fischer goes bishop to c6. He simply increases the pressure against the backwards e4 pawn. We have bishop to f4, a very nice idea by Larsen. Bishop to f3 was also possible, for example, simply defending the e4 pawn. So here, of course, you cannot capture with the bishop. If you capture with the bishop, then bishop to d4 will trap Fischer's queen. But you could try capturing with the knight, but then you simply get, again, knight captures. Bishop captures, queen captures, and now again this rook to f4 idea, where you simply kick the queen back all the way to c6, and now rook to h4 will again be a very nice attack against the black king. So okay, after this bishop to c6 move, Larsen goes for bishop to f4. So it seems that Fischer's queen is trapped, but it's very unlikely that Fischer would blunder a queen on move 19 in a world candidate series, so of course he had everything calculated. He goes knight captures on e4, now this comes with an attack on Larsen's queen. Knight captures on e4, and now queen captures on e4. And here you have to decide what to do. Larsen played bishop to d3, which is the best move. Bishop to f3, not as much, because this would lose you a pawn after queen to d4 check. Queen captures, bishop captures with check, bishop to e3, captures, and now captures on f3. Rook captures, and now not capturing here because your e7 pawn is hanging, but rook to c7 defending. The other rook can come here. All is well, and Fischer keeps his extra pawn here. So after this queen e4 move, bishop to d3 with an attack against Fischer's queen. Now, while the bishop was here, there was the threat, of course, of queen captures on g2. This stops both threats and forces Fischer's queen to move. Queen to d4 with check, we have king to h1, and now rook c to e8 as the e7 pawn was under attack. Bishop to e3 attacking Fischer's queen. We have queen to c3. Here Fischer has to allow capturing of his pawn because the queen doesn't really have anywhere to go. So bishop captures. You cannot capture the bishop because the queen would be hanging. We have queen captures on d2, bishop captures, and now bishop to e5. Bishop to f4, bishop captures, rook captures, g captures on f5, and this might, well, we could say that this is the critical moment of the game. In this position, Larsen played rook captures on f5, but it will be only after the game, and you know, many well, not years, but I don't know when was the official analysis that Bent Larsen said that he could have won the game in this position, which I'm not all that sure that it stands, because okay, rook captures on f5 was played in the game. He later suggested rook to e3, but then after rook to g8 you have bishop captures on f5, king to h6, and now not rook to h3, but rather bishop to h3. If rook to h3, this is a very interesting move, because now if Fischer goes king to g7, then white can easily win the game here. And although this is only a sideline, feel free to pause the video here and find the winning idea, because it's quite enjoyable. I'll give it a couple of seconds if you want to decide whether to do it or not. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations. It's really a nice tactic, and you are a great player. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, bishop to e6 is the move. What's the idea? Well, now you're threatening rook captures on f7, and also if pawn captures, then you simply play rook to g3 check. King has to go to the h file, doesn't really matter where. Rook to h4 will be checkmate. And on the other hand, even if you don't capture, for example, if you play f5, it doesn't really matter. Rook to g3 comes, you move, now comes rook captures, and the bishop is guarding the rook. Captures, you're up a rook, you're winning this game. But it doesn't really work, because after king to h6, you don't have to go, after rook to h3 check, you can simply go king g5, and now all is well. The rook is under attack, you move the rook, here comes e6, and all is well now. Rook g3 check, you move, rook checks, you move, rook checks, you move, captures, and now the bishop simply has to move, and black is perfectly fine here. So what Larsen's idea was after this king to h6 move is rather bishop to h3. And now after king comes to, after rook to g7, defending the f7 pawn, now b5. Captures, the bishop has to keep an eye on the g2 pawn, so bishop to d5, and here Larsen said that this rook to h4 check, king here, and now rook to d4, the bishop has nowhere to go. Well, of course you can go to e6, but here you would lose a pawn, and here, after all is said and done, Larsen would be up a pawn. So this was an idea Larsen mentions, but still, if this is winning, you know, perhaps it is, perhaps not. It's hard to say. A lot of things can be said about this position. But okay, it was not played in the game. After gf5, rook captures on f5 was played by Larsen, now threatening all sorts of discoveries, you know, as the bishop is eyeing the king on h7. So king to g7. We have rook to g5 check, king moves with an attack on the rook, and h4 now. And okay, Larsen really has Fischer's king in the corner here. So e6 by Fischer, rook to f1, threatening rook to f6, and now of course f5. Rook to e1, and now preparing to pile up on the e6 pawn, and now comes rook to f7, preparing to perhaps double up on the e-file. Also, while this rook is busy guarding the e6 pawn, Fischer would like to play rook to g7 to exchange his rook for Larsen's super active rook. b5 here, we have pawn captures, and now bishop back to d7. g4. Again, a very nice idea. Now, of course, if you capture, you get bishop to g6, you would lose the exchange here. So after g4, rook to a8. A very nice move by Fischer. G captures on f5, e captures on f5. And here, with a move like rook e to g1, Larsen has more than enough play activity here to at least draw the game here. And you know, all would be well probably for him, and this could still be anyone's game. But after this e captures on f5 move, he played bishop to c4, slightly improving the position before deciding what to do next. Perhaps his idea was moving the rook to g1 after this move, but it's hard to say. But this move allows Fischer a move that Larsen did not expect. Here, of course, Fischer's rook on f7 is under attack, but Fischer did not become world champion by moving his rook when his opponents attacked it. So feel free to pause the video here and find the only move that allows Fischer to go to push for some advantage in this position. I'll give it a, you know, feel free to, you know, study the position some more. And remember, Larsen's move was bishop to c4, so Fischer's move really takes advantage of this move. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are definitely not a rook mover. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, rook to a4. Well, okay, you did move the rook, but not the one that was attacked. So what do you do here? Okay, if bishop captures on f7, rook captures on h4 with check. So this is basically the idea. King moves wherever, g1 or g2, and now king captures here, you just won a pawn. So the idea is really that simple. After bishop to c4, rook to a4. You attack the undefended bishop on c4. So here Larsen played rook to c1, which is you know, capturing immediately on f7 and allowing the loss of one pawn was better than the move Larsen played here, because he must have overrooked this move. So okay, bishop captures on b5, and now there's nothing to do here. Here, if you capture the bishop now, then comes rook captures on h4 with the same idea. You lose the exchange now, which is even worse. Captures with check, you move, and then king captures here. It's two rooks against a bishop and a rook, and 2 pawns up, completely winning. So here, after bishop captures on b5, Larsen only now captured on f7, and we have rook captures on h4 with check. King to G2, and now king captures on G5. Fischer is now up 2 pawns, and of course this is now completely winning. It's only a matter of how Fischer will, take advantage of his 2 extra pawns. So okay, bishop to D5, attacking the B7 pawn, bishop to A6, simply defending. There's no breaking through here. Rook to D1, we have rook to A4. Bishop to F3 now threatening the D6 pawn, but Fischer doesn't mind. Captures, now it's 2 pawns against 0 pawns, again completely winning. Rook to A2 check, king moves, king to F4 now, improving the position of the king. Bishop G2, rook to B2, rook to D7 now. And now simply start pushing your passed pawn. Rook to D8, we have bishop to E2, and now bishop to H3. Bishop to G4, of course, Larsen cannot afford to trade pieces here. Bishop to F1, and now bishop to F3. We have rook to B8, bishop to E4, making room for the king. We have bishop to A6, and now king to E3. And now Fischer's bishop and king really make way for this passed F pawn to become a queen. Rook to C8, we have rook to B1 check, king to H2, and now comes king to F4. And here, it doesn't matter what Larsen plays now. Fischer is no longer interested in promoting his pawn, but rather Larsen is getting checkmated here, regardless of what he plays. If you play something, well, whatever, then you get rook to H1. This will be checkmate because the bishop is guarding the G2 square, the king is guarding the G3 square, so there's really no way out of this. Whatever you play, you can give up a couple of pieces with bishop to F1, rook C1, but there is no defense whatsoever against rook to H1 checkmate. So yeah, this is game number 2 of the 1971 semi-final match between Bent Larsen and Bobby Fischer. I do hope you enjoyed it and that you're enjoying the Bobby Fischer series so far. It's very interesting after, well, this was something Mikhail Botvinnik said after the match, but he said that it's very easy to understand how Fischer won every game against Mark Taimanov, and also it's very easy to understand how he won games against Bent Larsen. But how he won, how he won with such a drastic margin that never ever happened before in chess history, that isn't all that easy to explain. But we'll get back to that, and we're going to talk about that some more after we finish the series. So yeah. I would like to thank Felipe Castro Cardona, Christopher Drake, Chris Thorpe, Taneli Laurinoli, and Dennis Tomlinson for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon with another game from the Bobby Fischer series, Larsen vs. Fischer, Game 3. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.